Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling data security.
Yeah, getting into the nitty-gritty of protecting sensitive data.
All that good stuff. And we're using Chapter 5 from the CISD Study Guide as our roadmap.
The 10th edition, so we're talking serious expert-level stuff.
Absolutely. We'll be uncovering some really interesting concepts. Like, have you heard of data remnants?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Basically, it's like data ghosts that linger.
Data ghosts. Okay, that's a bit creepy.
It can be. But we'll get into all that. First things first, what exactly is sensitive data, and why is it so important to protect?
Yeah, let's start with the basics.
Sure. So sensitive data, it's any information that, if exposed, could lead to harm.
Harm to you.
Well, it could be harm to individuals, like identity theft,
Makes sense.
or harm to a company, like
Mhm.
losing trade secrets.
Right, like the recipe for Coca-Cola. You wouldn't want that getting out.
Exactly. And it could even be harm to national security. So it's a wide range of information, and the potential consequences are serious.
Definitely. So it's not just about protecting company secrets, it's about protecting people and even entire countries.
Absolutely. And that's why data security is so crucial.
Okay, so we know sensitive data is important. Can you give us some specific types of sensitive data we should be aware of?
Absolutely. Let's start with personally identifiable information, or PII.
PIR,
This is anything that can be used to identify a specific individual.
like our names and addresses.
Yep, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Also, things like social security numbers, driver's license numbers, even your birth date.
So even seemingly harmless information can be sensitive if it can be used to identify someone.
Exactly. And organizations have a huge responsibility to protect this information.
Because if it gets into the wrong hands, it could be used for identity theft, fraud, all sorts of bad things.
Exactly. And there are laws in place, like in the U.S., that require organizations to notify individuals if their PII has been compromised.
I've definitely seen those data breach notifications in the news. Remember that massive Equifax breach a few years back?
Oh yeah, that was a huge one. Millions of people affected.
Scary stuff. So PII, that's one big category. What else do we have?
Another important category is protected health information, or PHI.
PHI. Yeah.
This falls under HIPAA regulations in the United States.
HIPAA, that's the Health Information Privacy Law, right?
Yep, it covers any information related to an individual's health status, treatment, or payment for healthcare.
So it's not just about protecting medical records, it's about protecting any information that could reveal someone's health condition.
Precisely. And it applies to a wide range of organizations, not just doctors and hospitals.
Like who else?
Insurance companies, employers who offer health benefits, even schools and universities.
Wow, so the scope of HIPAA is broader than many people realize.
It is, and it's important for organizations to understand their responsibilities under its eye and take the necessary steps to protect THI.
Okay, we've got PII and PHI. Any other major types of sensitive data?
Oh yeah, we've also got proprietary data.
Proprietary data, what's that all about?
This encompasses anything that gives a company a competitive edge.
Like their secret sauce, their special formula for success?
You got it. It could be things like software code, technical plans, internal strategies, customer lists.
Anything that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could really harm the company.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about something like Google's search algorithm or the formula for Coca-Cola.
Yeah, those are definitely things companies want to keep under wraps.
And protecting this kind of data is essential for a company's survival and success.
Okay, so we've got PII, PHI, and proprietary data. Those are the big three, right?
Those are some of the most common categories. But it's important to remember that what constitutes sensitive data can vary depending on the context.
Like industry regulations, specific company policies, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But understanding these basic categories is a great starting point.
All right, so now that we know what sensitive data is, let's talk about how it's categorized. Is it like in those spy movies where they have top secret and confidential?
It's similar. Governments use classifications like top secret, secret, and confidential based on the potential damage to national security if the information were to be disclosed.
So like if it's top secret, it could cause catastrophic damage.
Exactly. But in the private sector, companies tend to use different classifications, focusing on potential harm to the business.
Makes sense. So what are some of the classifications companies use?
Common ones include confidential or proprietary for highly sensitive information that could seriously harm the company if disclosed.
Okay, so that's like the top secret equivalent for businesses?
You could say that. Then there's private for internal data that needs to be protected but isn't as critical as confidential information.
So things like employee payroll data or internal memos.
Yeah, good examples. And then there's sensitive for information that requires a moderate level of protection.
So things like customer contact information or marketing plans.
Exactly. And finally, there's public for information that's already publicly available, like company brochures or website content.
So it's not about keeping it secret, it's more about protecting its integrity.
That's right. You wouldn't want someone hacking your website and changing all your product prices.
Yeah, that could cause a lot of chaos and damage to the company's reputation.
Absolutely. So even though it's public information, it still needs to be protected.
Got it. So we've classified our data, we know what's sensitive and how sensitive it is. What's next? How do we actually go about protecting it?
Well, to answer that, we need to understand that data can exist in three different states.
3 different states, like what?
Think of it like water. It can be ice, liquid, or steam, each with different properties.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does this relate to data?
Well, we have data at rest, data in transit, and data in use. And each state requires different security measures.
Interesting. Let's break down each state, starting with data at rest. What is that exactly?
Data at rest is any data that's stored on a device or a system like a hard drive, a USB stick, even a backup tape.
So basically any data that's just sitting there, not actively being used?
Exactly. It's like files stored on your computer or data archived on a backup server.
Okay, so how do we protect this kind of data?
The most common and effective way is through encryption.
Encryption, so basically scrambling the data so it's unreadable without the proper key.
Yep, that's the idea. It's like locking your valuables in a safe. Only someone with the key can access them.
Makes sense. So what about when that data is being moved around, like when I send an email or upload a file to the cloud?
That's data in transit, any data that's traveling over a network.
So it's moving from one point to another, whether it's within a company's network or across the internet.
Exactly. And to protect this type of data, we use a combination of symmetric and asymmetric encryption.
Whoa, back up a second. Symmetric and asymmetric encryption, that sounds
Right.
complicated.
It's not as complex as it sounds. Think of symmetric encryption like using the same key to lock and unlock a door.
Okay, I can picture that.
Both the sender and the receiver have a copy of the key, and they use it to scramble and unscramble the data.
So it's like a shared secret code.
Exactly. Now, asymmetric encryption is a bit different. It uses two keys, a public key and a private key.
Okay, now you're losing me.
Think of it like a mailbox. Anyone can drop a letter in, that's the public key.
Okay, I'm following so far.
But only the person with the mailbox key, the private key, can open it and read the letter.
Ah, so the public key encrypts the data and the private key decrypts it.
You got it. And this method is really secure because the private key never needs to be shared.
So even if someone intercepts the data, they can't decrypt it without the private key.
Exactly. It's a very clever system.
All right, so we've got data at rest, data in transit. What's the third state?
The third state is data in use.
Data in use. What's that?
This is data that's actively being processed by an application.
So like when I'm working on a document or browsing a website.
Exactly. The data is temporarily being accessed and manipulated by the computer's memory.
Okay, so the data is out in the open, so to speak.
In a way, yes. And this state is the trickiest to protect because the data needs to be decrypted for the application to use it.
So it's vulnerable while it's being used?
It can be, yes. But there are measures we can take to mitigate the risks.
Like what?
One measure is to purge memory buffers after use.
Purging memory buffers. What does that mean?
It's basically wiping the temporary storage clean after the data is no longer needed.
So it's like erasing the whiteboard after the meeting.
Exactly. And another exciting development is homomorphic encryption.
Homomorphic encryption. That sounds intense.
It's pretty cool. It allows applications to work on encrypted data without decrypting it.
So the data remains encrypted even while it's being used.
That's the goal. It's still a developing technology, but it has the potential to revolutionize data security.
Wow, working on encrypted data. That sounds futuristic. Okay, so we've covered the 3 states of data. That's a lot to think about. But is encryption the only way to protect data? Are there other tools and techniques out there?
Absolutely. Encryption is a foundational piece, but there's a whole toolbox of strategies we can use, like data loss prevention systems or DLPs.
DLPs. Never heard of those. What are they?
Imagine them as security guards for your data. They monitor and scan outgoing data, looking for any sensitive information that shouldn't be leaving the network.
So they're like digital detectives sniffing out data leaks.
That's a great way to put it. They can detect keywords, patterns, even specific file types.
So if I try to email a document containing a social security number, a DLP would flag it.
Yep, exactly. And they can be deployed at various points in your network, like on email servers, web gateways, even endpoints like laptops and desktops.
So they're like a multi-layered security system looking for suspicious activity at every turn.
That's the idea. And they can block the transmission of sensitive data or alert administrators to potential breaches.
Wow, that's impressive. So DLPs, they're all about preventing data from leaving the organization's control.
Exactly. They're a crucial part of any comprehensive data security strategy.
Okay, so encryption, DLPs. What else do we have in our data security toolbox?
Well, for highly sensitive information, we can use something called digital rights management, or DRM.
PRM. Doesn't that have something to do with protecting music and movies?
You're right. It's often used to prevent piracy of digital content, but it can also be used to protect other types of intellectual property.
So if I wrote an ebook, I could use DRM to control who can copy it and how it's distributed.
Exactly. It allows you to set specific rules and restrictions on how the content can be accessed and used.
So it's like putting a digital lock on your creative work.
You could think of it that way.
Mm,
And it can be a powerful tool for protecting sensitive information, especially in industries where intellectual property is critical.
makes sense. But what about data that's stored in the cloud? That's a whole other world, right?
Absolutely. And that's where cloud access security brokers, or CASBs, come in.
CASPs. Okay, another acronym to add to our list.
They act as security gatekeepers for your cloud environment.
So they're like your own personal security team stationed in the cloud.
Exactly. They enforce your security policies and make sure only authorized users can access your cloud data.
So they're like the bouncers at the cloud club, making sure everyone has the right credentials.
That's a great analogy. They can also enforce things like encryption, access controls, and even DLP in the cloud environment.
So they're basically extending your on-premises security measures to the cloud.
That's right. And with more and more organizations moving to the cloud, CASBs are becoming increasingly important.
Okay, so we've got DRM for protecting intellectual property and CASBs for securing our cloud data. Are there any other tools or techniques we should be aware of, especially in light of all these privacy regulations like GDPR?
Oh yeah, you're talking about pseudonymization, tokenization, and anonymization. These techniques are all about protecting individual privacy.
Right, let's break those down one by one. What's pseudonymization?
Pseudonymization is basically using aliases to represent sensitive data.
So instead of using someone's real name, you use a fake name or code.
Exactly. Like if you were doing a research study with patient data, you could replace their real names with pseudonyms like patient A or subject 123.
So the researchers can analyze the data without knowing the patient's real identities.
Precisely. It's a great way to balance the need to use data for research or other purposes while still protecting individual privacy.
That makes a lot of sense. So pseudonymization, it's like creating a secret identity for data.
Exactly.
Okay, what about tokenization? How is that different?
Tokenization takes data masking a step further. Instead of using pseudonyms, it replaces sensitive data with random tokens that have no inherent meaning.
So it's like substituting a secret code for the real information.
You got it. Imagine you're shopping online and you enter your credit card details. If the website uses tokenization, your credit card number is immediately replaced with a unique token.
So even if hackers breach the system, they only see meaningless tokens, not my actual credit card number.
Exactly. The real credit card data is stored securely in a separate system called a token vault.
So it's like a decoy for the real information.
And only the payment processor knows how to translate the token back to the actual data.
That's reassuring. So tokenization acts like a shield for our sensitive data.
And it's becoming increasingly popular, especially in industries dealing with financial transactions.
Okay, so pseudonymization creates aliases, and tokenization uses secret codes. What about anonymization?
Anonymization aims to remove all identifiable information from data, making it impossible to re-identify individuals.
So it's like erasing the data's identity completely.
It's more complex than just deleting names and addresses, though.
How so?
There might be other information that, when combined, could still identify someone. You have to consider things like age, gender, location, occupation, even medical history.
So you have to think like a detective, looking for clues that could lead back to an individual.
Exactly. And to achieve true anonymization, we use techniques like generalization and suppression.
Generalization and suppression, what are those?
Generalization involves making data less specific. Instead of reporting someone's exact age, you might group them into an age range, like 20, 25.
So it's more vague, less precise.
Exactly. And suppression involves removing certain data points altogether,
Hmm.
especially if they're unique and could be used to identify someone.
So if someone has a rare disease, you might suppress that information to protect their privacy.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance between using data for beneficial purposes and protecting individual privacy.
It sounds like anonymization is a multifaceted process that requires careful consideration.
It definitely is. It's not a simple task, but it's crucial for protecting privacy, especially when dealing with sensitive data.
All right, so we've covered the three states of data and a whole range of techniques for protecting it. But who's actually in charge of all this? Who are the key players in data security?
That's a great question. There are several roles involved, each with specific responsibilities. We'll start with the data owner.
Data owner. Sounds important. Who's that?
The data owner is typically a high-level executive who's ultimately responsible for decisions regarding data classification, labeling, and protection.
So they're the ones who set the rules and make sure the data is handled properly.
Exactly. They have the final say on what level of security is needed and what measures should be implemented.
Okay, so the data owner is like the head honcho of data security, but they don't actually handle the day-to-day tasks of implementing all those security measures, right?
You're right. That's where the data custodian comes in.
Data custodian, what do they do?
They're responsible for the technical implementation and maintenance of security controls, things like backups, access control, and secured data storage.
So they're the ones who make sure the systems are secure and the data is protected on a daily basis.
Exactly. They're like the guardians of the data.
Okay, so we have our data owner who sets the strategy and our data custodian who handles the operations. What about in the context of GDPR? Are there any other important roles we should know about?
Yes, under GDPR, we have the data controller and the data processor.
Okay, two more roles to keep track of. What do they do?
The data controller determines the purpose and means of processing personal data.
So they're the ones who decide why and how the data is being used.
Exactly. And they have a lot of responsibilities under GDPR, like ensuring data is collected lawfully and processed transparently.
So they're the ones who set the rules of engagement for data processing.
You could say that. Now, the data processor is a third-party organization that processes data on behalf of the controller.
So if a company hires a payroll processing firm, that firm would be considered a data processor.
Precisely. They're the ones who actually handle the data, but they're bound by the instructions of the data controller.
So it's like a partnership, with the controller setting the direction and the processor carrying out the tasks.
Exactly. And both parties have responsibilities under GDPR to ensure the data is protected.
Okay, so we have our data owner, data custodian, data controller, and data processor. That's quite a team. But how do they actually put all these data protection techniques into practice? Do they just wing it, or is there a more structured approach?
There's definitely a more structured approach, and it all starts with security baselines.
Baselines. What are those?
Think of them as predefined sets of security controls that provide a minimum level of protection for information systems.
So it's like a security checklist, a set of best practices to follow.
Exactly. They give organizations a starting point for implementing security measures.
Do you have an example of a security baseline?
One commonly used baseline is NIST SP 800-53.
NIST SP 853, that's a mouthful.
It stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, a U.S. government agency.
So it's a government-developed set of security standards.
Right, and it outlines a comprehensive set of security controls for federal information systems.
Okay, so it's for government systems, but is it relevant to private sector companies too?
Absolutely. It's widely used as a benchmark for security best practices, even outside the government.
So even if it's not mandatory, it's a good framework to follow.
It is. And it can help organizations meet compliance requirements for various regulations, including GDPR.
So NIST SP 853, it's our security playbook, but I'm guessing one size doesn't fit all. Organizations have different needs and levels of risk.
You're exactly right. That's why we have something called tailoring.
Tailoring, like tailoring a suit to fit perfectly.
Precisely. It's about adapting the baseline to fit your organization's specific requirements.
So you might add or remove controls, adjust their strength, or even implement compensating controls.
Compensating controls, what are those?
There are alternative measures you can take if a specific control in the baseline isn't feasible or practical for your organization.
Perfect explanation. It's all about finding the right balance between security and usability.
Okay, so tailoring is about customizing the controls to fit our needs. Is there anything else we need to consider when implementing security baselines?
Yes, there's also scoping.
Scoping, what's that about?
It's about deciding which controls apply to which systems.
So you wouldn't apply the same level of security to a public website as you would to a server storing sensitive customer data.
Exactly. It's about focusing your security efforts where they matter most.
So scoping is about being strategic and efficient with our security resources.
That's the idea. It's about ensuring your security controls are effective and aligned with your organization's risk tolerance.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about what sensitive data is, how it's classified, the three states of data, and a bunch of tools and techniques for protecting it.
We've even touched on some key roles and responsibilities in data security.
It's a lot to digest, but it's fascinating stuff. And before we move on to those more advanced data protection methods we mentioned earlier, let's take a quick break.
Sounds good. We'll be back in a few minutes to dive deeper into pseudonymization, tokenization, and anonymization. All right, let's dive into those advanced data protection methods, starting with pseudonymization.
Pseudonymization, it sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It kind of is. It's all about creating aliases for sensitive data.
So instead of using real names, we use fake names or codes.
Exactly. It's like giving data a secret identity.
I like that. So how does this work in practice?
Let's say a medical research organization wants to study a new drug. They need access to patient data to analyze the drug's effectiveness.
Right.
But they don't need to know the patient's names or other identifying information.
That makes sense. So that's where pseudonymization comes in.
Exactly. The research organization receives the data, but instead of real names, they see pseudonyms like patient A or subject 1, 2, and 3.
So the data is still useful for analysis, but the individual's privacy is protected.
Precisely. And if for some reason they need to link the data back to the original identifying information, there's a secure process for that.
So it's not completely anonymous, but it's a good balance between data utility and privacy.
Exactly. It's a powerful technique for protecting privacy while still allowing data to be used for beneficial purposes.
Okay, pseudonymization, check. What about tokenization? How does that work?
Tokenization replaces sensitive data with random tokens that have no inherent meaning.
So it's like giving the data a secret code name, but the code name doesn't actually mean anything.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Think about online shopping. You enter your credit card details to buy something.
I do that all the time.
If the website uses tokenization, your credit card number is immediately replaced with a unique token.
So even if hackers get into the system, they only see these meaningless tokens.
Right. They don't see your actual credit card number.
So my credit card information is safe, even if there's a breach.
Exactly. The actual credit card data is stored securely in a separate system called a token vault.
A token vault sounds like something out of a superhero movie.
And only the payment processor has the key to unlock the vault and retrieve the real credit card data.
Okay, so tokenization is like a decoy, protecting the real data from prying eyes.
It's a great way to add an extra layer of security, especially for sensitive information like credit card numbers.
Tokenization, got it. Now, what about anonymization? That sounds like the most extreme form of data protection.
It is, in a way. Anonymization aims to remove all identifiable information from the data.
So there's no way to link the data back to a specific individual.
That's the goal. It's often used when organizations want to share data for research or statistical analysis, but need to protect people's privacy.
So they can analyze trends and patterns without knowing who the data points represent.
Right. But it's more complex than just deleting names and addresses.
How so?
There might be other pieces of information that, when combined, could still identify someone.
What's what?
Think about things like age, gender, location, occupation, even medical history. If you have enough of these data points, you might be able to narrow down who the individual is.
So you have to be very thorough to ensure true anonymity.
Absolutely. We use techniques like generalization and suppression to minimize the risk of re-identification.
Generalization and suppression. Remind me what those are again.
Generalization is about making data less specific, like reporting an age range instead of an exact age.
So instead of saying someone is 35 years old, you say they're in their 30s.
Exactly. Suppression is about removing certain data points altogether, especially if they're unique and could be used to identify someone.
So if someone has a rare medical condition, you might remove that information to protect their privacy.
Right. It's a delicate balance. You want to make the data as useful as possible while still protecting people's privacy.
Anonymization sounds like a very challenging process.
It can be, but it's essential for certain use cases where privacy is paramount.
Okay, so pseudonymization, tokenization, and anonymization. Those are some powerful tools for protecting privacy.
They are, and they're becoming increasingly important as we collect and use more and more data about individuals.
It's like a whole new level of data security going beyond just protecting the confidentiality of the data itself.
It's about protecting the individuals behind the data.
Now that we've explored these privacy-enhancing techniques, let's shift gears and talk about something a bit more tangible: physical security.
Physical security, you mean like locks and security cameras?
Yeah, all that good stuff. It's easy to get caught up in the digital world and forget about the physical aspects of data security.
But it's just as important.
Absolutely. If someone can physically access your servers or your backup tapes, all those fancy encryption algorithms won't matter much.
It's like having a state-of-the-art security system, but leaving your front door wide open.
So what are some key things organizations should be doing to ensure the physical security of their data?
Access control is paramount. You need to restrict physical access to areas where sensitive data is stored.
So server rooms, data centers, that sort of thing.
Exactly. This could involve keycard access, biometric authentication, security guards, or a combination of these measures.
It's like creating a fortress around your data.
And it's not just about keeping unauthorized people out. You also need to keep track of who's coming and going.
So maintaining logs of who accessed what and when.
Precisely. That way, if there's a security incident, you can investigate who might have been involved.
Makes sense. What about environmental controls? Do those play a role in physical security?
Absolutely. Data storage devices are sensitive to things like temperature, humidity, and dust.
So if a server room gets too hot or too humid, it could damage the hard drives.
Exactly. And dust can clog cooling fans and lead to overheating, which is bad news for any electronic equipment.
So data centers need to have proper ventilation, cooling systems, and air filtration.
That's right. They need to create an optimal environment for data storage, like a museum for your data.
A data museum, I like that. What about protecting the storage devices themselves from theft or damage?
That's another important layer of security. You might use locked cabinets, safes, or cages to secure your hardware.
So no leaving those backup tapes lying around.
Definitely not. And if you need to transport sensitive data, you need to do it securely.
Like those armored trucks that transport cash.
Similar idea. You need procedures for secure transportation, whether it's to an off-site storage facility or disaster recovery site.
Okay, so access control, environmental controls, secure storage, and transportation. Anything else?
Having a plan for disasters and emergencies is crucial.
Oh, right. Like what happens if there's a fire, a flood, or an earthquake?
Exactly. You need to have off-site backups and a disaster recovery plan in place.
So you can recover your data and get your business back up and running as quickly as possible.
Precisely. It's all about minimizing downtime and ensuring business continuity.
I'm realizing that physical security is a lot more than just locks and cameras. It's about thinking holistically about all the potential threats to your data.
It's about having a multi-layered approach that addresses both physical and digital vulnerabilities.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from those advanced privacy-enhancing techniques to the nitty-gritty of physical security. But before we wrap up, is there one aspect of data security that's often overlooked?
One thing that often gets overlooked is data destruction.
Data destruction? You mean like deleting files when you're done with them?
It's more than just hitting the delete key. It's about securely wiping data from storage devices so it can't be recovered, even with advanced forensic techniques.
So even if I empty my recycle bin, the data might still be lurking somewhere on my hard drive.
It's possible, yes. And this can be a major security risk, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data.
So how do we ensure that data is truly gone, beyond any doubt?
There are several methods, each with its own level of security. One common method is overwriting.
Overwriting, what's that?
It involves repeatedly writing random data over the existing data.
So it's like using a digital shredder to obliterate the data.
That's a good analogy. The more times you overwrite the data, the harder it is to recover.
Makes sense. What other methods are there?
Another method is degassing, which uses a strong magnetic field to erase data from magnetic storage devices.
Degaussing, that sounds intense.
It's very effective for wiping data from hard drives and tapes.
But it doesn't work on solid-state drives, right?
Right. SSDs use different technology, so you need to use different methods to securely erase them.
Like what?
There are special software tools that can issue secure erase commands to SSDs.
So it's like telling the SSD to wipe itself clean.
Exactly. And in some cases, the most secure way to destroy data on an SSD is to physically destroy the drive.
Physically destroy, like smash it with a hammer.
It might sound extreme, but sometimes it's the only way to be absolutely sure the data is unrecoverable.
Wow, data destruction is serious business. It's like the final act in the data life cycle.
It's an often overlooked but crucial aspect of data security.
Okay, so we've covered data creation, storage, protection, and now destruction. It's like the circle of data life.
And it's important to consider security at every stage of that life cycle.
We've learned so much today, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface of data security.
It's a vast and ever-evolving field.
Before we move on to our next topic, let's take a moment to reflect on something most people don't realize about their own data, the sheer amount of data they generate on a daily basis.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? Every time we use our phones, browse the web, or make a purchase, we're leaving behind a digital trail.
It's like we're shedding digital skin cells everywhere we go.
Yeah. And this data can be incredibly valuable, not just to us, but to others as well.
You mean like those advertisers who want to target us with personalized ads?
That's one example, but it goes far beyond that. There are companies called data brokers who collect and sell our information.
Data brokers. Who are they? And what do they do with our data? Data brokers. It sounds kind of shady.
It can be, yeah. They operate in a bit of a gray area. They gather data from all sorts of places.
Like where?
Well, our online purchases, for one. Social media activity, too.
Mm-hmm.
Even public records like voter registration.
So basically, they're piecing together these detailed profiles of us without us even realizing it.
Pretty much, yeah. And they sell this information to anyone who's willing to pay.
Like who? Who would want to
Yeah.
buy this information?
Marketers, for one. They use it to target us with personalized ads,
Uh-huh.
but it goes beyond that.
Who else?
Oh, businesses, too. They might use it for things like credit risk assessments or even background checks.
And even government agencies.
It happens, yeah. They might use it for law enforcement or intelligence gathering purposes.
Wow, that's kind of scary. Knowing that all this information about us is being collected and sold, it makes you want to be more careful about what you share online.
Absolutely. It's important to be mindful of your digital footprint. Think twice before posting those vacation photos or sharing personal details on social media.
And those online quizzes that ask for your birthday and your mother's maiden name, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, those can be tricky. Always be wary of any website or app that asks for more information than seems necessary.
Okay, so be mindful of what we share. What else can we do to protect our privacy from these data brokers?
Well, adjusting your privacy settings on social media and other online services is a good start.
So limiting who can see my posts and what information those third-party apps can access.
Exactly. And don't forget to read those privacy policies, as tedious as they can be.
No one actually reads those, right?
Probably not, but it's important to at least skim them to get a sense of how your data is being used.
Okay, so privacy settings and privacy policies. What else can we do to minimize our data trail?
You can use privacy-focused tools and services.
Like what?
Well, there are privacy-focused search engines that don't track your searches.
So I can finally Google those embarrassing medical questions without worrying about it coming back to haunt me.
Exactly. And you can use a virtual private network, or VPN, to encrypt your internet traffic and mask your IP address.
So it's like browsing the web incognito.
Pretty much, yeah. It adds an extra layer of privacy, especially when using public Wi-Fi.
That's a good tip, especially with all the free Wi-Fi hotspots popping up everywhere.
Yeah, you never know who's snooping on those networks. A VPN can help protect your data from prying eyes.
Okay, so privacy-focused tools and services. Any other suggestions?
Regularly reviewing your online accounts and deleting any that you're no longer using is a good practice.
It's like digital spring cleaning, getting rid of all the clutter.
Exactly. And it can help reduce your digital footprint and limit the amount of data that's out there about you.
Good advice. Well, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the different types of sensitive data to all the ways we can protect it.
It's a complex and constantly evolving landscape.
But with the right knowledge and tools, we can all be more proactive about protecting our data and our privacy.
Absolutely. It's not about being paranoid. It's about being informed and empowered.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of data security. We hope you've learned some valuable insights that you can apply in your own lives.
And remember, data security is an ongoing journey. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there.
And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.